Good morning, good morning, good morning, one and all. Welcome back to another edition of Visionaries and Truth Tellers with your host. I am Anthony L. Carter, the host, the producer, the madman behind all this stuff. This is another edition of Visionaries and Truth Tellers. And as you all know, I am always on the hunt, the lookout for people who are doing great things for the planet, for humanity, and moving us forward. Now, typically, I have to do a lot of stalking on Twitter to get people, but this is somebody I've known for 3 years now, 4 years.
3 or 4 years, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We met at a conference years ago and just kind of clicked and stayed in connection with one another. So, no stalking was involved with this one, which does not mean this is not going to be a great conversation. So, without further ado, I'm going to let him introduce himself. Give us your 30-second bio, Mr. Damon Colaluca.
All right. Well, thanks, Anthony. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Damon Colaluca, and currently I'm the principal consultant at Colaluca and Associates. We're a boutique consulting firm that helps small and mid-sized nonprofit organizations basically thrive in chaos, right? To handle change. I started my career in the nonprofit sector way back before The Simpsons aired. So that's a long time if it's before The Simpsons. And during my career, I've been all over the country, working with mostly the YMCA in different roles: CEO, COO, executive vice president, pretty much any job. That I was a bus driver or dishwasher. So any job in the nonprofit sector I've probably done. And my thoughts around the nonprofit sector are that I truly believe that the nonprofit sector is poised to repair the fraying fabric of our society. However, they don't have either resources, skills, or tools to be as effective as they could be. And so that's where our organization and our agency comes in, is to help provide those things and build capacity so that we can really make the difference that needs to be made in our country.
Okay, very good, very good. You said a couple of things I definitely want to come back to, but I want to start with, why chaos? What made you decide you were going to tame the chaos, be a chaos master? I'll put it that way.
So, I mean, that kind of, a couple of things. One is every position I've ever been in has always had some form of change or we used to call it turnaround, right? You'd come into an organization that was completely upside down, and your job was to fix it. And all of that required change, right? It required understanding the chaos that was going on and creating some sort of plan to order. Recently, within the last 10 years, one of the things that I've noticed, and that all the data supports, is that the pace of change has increased every year. And I'll give you an example. If you look at the Fortune 500 list of companies, right? Those are the largest companies in the United States. That list started in 1955. And Anthony, I'm gonna quiz you. How many of those companies do you think are still on that list today? So these are the largest companies that America has ever produced. So from 1955 to today, how many companies appear on both lists, like today's list and the inaugural list?
And we're also on the original list.
Right.
I would say easily less than 200.
Right. So it's 82% of them are gone.
Wow.
Right. So only 18% remain. And that just tells you how volatile things are for even the largest companies to not be able to navigate this change. The other thing that's interesting is to find that McKinsey did some studies on how fast things change. And if you had a business, in the 1930s, you could work your whole career doing the exact same thing and nothing would ever change. right?
Hmm.
That you could sell the same product the same way to the same people, um, and have your whole career doing, having zero change in your job. Um, so the what they found was companies in that time frame. So from 1900 to around 1980, the the pace of change was about 75 years. So nothing needed to change in a company for 75 years.
Hmm.
We did it. McKinsey did another survey in the early 80s, and that time dropped down to 15 years. That if you didn't change something major in your company in 15 years, you would go away. And then recently, this has happened again in the 2000s, and that time has now cut in half again. So we have now 7 years.
Hmm.
So if you're thinking about a company having how agile a company has to be compared to companies in the 20th century, it's amazing how much more change we're dealing with, and at how fast it's happening. And so those nonprofits are not immune to that. They have the same issues. If you think about COVID, obviously was a giant change for everybody. But even before that, organizations were having to look at the changing needs of their constituents, the increasing needs of their constituents, and how are they going to continue to help folks whose absolute bottom, the community itself was changing and evolving, and so the folks who are needing help, those needs were changing as well. So that's kind of why chaos, because it is just helping guide folks through things that we just don't know. Planning for the future is very tricky and uncertain, and requires different tools than what we've used in the past.
Okay. Okay. So a couple of things you said. So the first thing, when you said 82% of those companies are no longer. So when you say they're no longer on the list, does this mean they reinvented themselves, or they're just not around at all? Like if you
Some
said a
of it
name,
is
you would know.
sure. So some of them went under, like Sears,
Right.
right? Went
Okay.
away. Blockbuster, right?
Right.
Others probably did go bankrupt, and they might have come back from, like Kodak is a great example of a company that went bankrupt, and through bankruptcy, and this is something that is they are now in pharmaceuticals.
Hmm.
They moved from photography to pharmaceuticals. So there's a lot of there is some reinvention in there, but most of it is they went bankrupt and went away.
Okay. Okay. Um, so you said something about in your bio about repairing society,
Mhm.
right? That you think that is your thought is um, that's one of the many roles that the nonprofit world could fill.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about that. About how. So if you were going to come up with a couple of ways to repair a society if you had your ideal world, and
Right.
you had a nonprofit, you said, whatever you come up with, this is what's going to repair society. What would that look like or sound
Oh, I don't think there's one thing. I
like?
think that's where the strength of the nonprofit sector is that it is there is such a variety of organizations solving very specific programs,
Mhm.
or very very specific problems in their community. And I think that kind of that decentralized kind of way that we're looking at how do we solve these problems, I think is going to be the right strategy. I mean, we've tried to top down. The government comes in and says we're going to do this one thing, and it may move the needle on some things, but it also creates issues on the other. So I think the United States has a unique opportunity to, if fully funded, the
Mhm.
nonprofit sector could really look at the helping solve some of the major problems that are afflicting us. Let's just look at what are the effects of poverty on a community. They are manifold. There's dozens, right? And so the government can start working on helping the larger issue of creating the structures that would affect folks going into poverty. But at the same time, nonprofit organizations could come in from the ground up and support the folks who are transitioning or being affected by those myriad different problems that poverty creates, right? So whether it's housing, food, job skills, parenting, all those things that feed into or that are the effects of poverty, the nonprofit sector is working on and continues to work on. But I think it could be used much better again if when funded differently.
Okay. And I've heard you mention the word transition a couple of times, and it just kind of dawned on me. Do you think the word transition is the same as transformation? And if so, explain why. And if not, because sometimes, well, I'll let you.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that distinction in that. I think transition means I'm the same person or the same thing, just moving from one state to another. Whereas I feel transformation has to do with I'm somehow changing as a person. I'm transforming into something different, right? I'm not the same thing moving through a path. I have now, transcended a path, right? Because I've changed fundamentally who I am as a person, and I'm using transition and transformation in a personal, but it could also be, a community or an organization or whatever. Having a person transition from, from not having a job to a job, you're the same person. You just change states.
Right.
But transforming someone into something into a different, a different person with different skill sets or different outlook, or a different view on whether or not they need a job at all. That's to me, I think that's the distinction that I think is very interesting to unpack. Is how do we frame what's happening, right? And what we want to have happen with people is transition or transformation or something else.
Okay, I was just asking because I've heard over the years, I've worked in and around and for and about a lot of different nonprofits. And what I hear people, and many times I think we get stuck because we get these buzzwords going, right?
Sure.
And they sound nice, they sound nice, and people write about them, and they do this, and they, you go someplace and it's the same, half a dozen words that keep coming up, right? People keep peppering the conversation with these words. And I know for years I've heard this term, I've heard this whole thing about transition. I heard it a lot during COVID. And then years ago, I was working with this guy who was, I think he was some kind of cop. And I remember he had these people in a program who were just getting out of prison. And they would talk constantly about transformation. And I remember them saying, and I remember somebody at some point stood up and somebody made the declaration that, and it might have been the guy who ran the program, that, if you change something, like you said, if I go from being unemployed to if I go from unemployed to being employed, that's a change, right? I could be the same person with the same issues, not having learned anything since the last job, right? And he was saying if you make that type of change, you can always change back. Transformation means it's never going to go back to the way it was before.
Yeah,
almost like a butterfly in a cocoon. It's like the butterfly is never going to go back to living in the cocoon. And I always I've been wondering about that a lot lately because I've been looking at, just on a personal level, for me, the difference between the two. And what are things I never ever want to do again? What are things that I definitely don't want to go back to doing? And some of the stuff I want to take with me, right? Like you
Right.
don't leave it, you don't completely leave your skill set when you go from one to another. But
Yeah.
learning about the difference between necessary and sufficient is also something I've been learning a lot lately too. And that's why I was asking about the difference, or if you see the difference between
Yeah.
transition and transformation. And you answered it perfectly. So,
Well, yeah,
well,
and I think that whole the intentionality of you know of looking at yourself and saying, I want to move from where I am to where I want to be. What am I going to leave behind?
mm-hmm,
What am I going to bring with me? And organizations, the ones that are succeeding are the ones who have had that kind of intentional conversation about what are the artifacts that we're going to bring forward from pre-COVID,
mm-hmm,
and what are the things we're going to bring forward from COVID, and then what are we going to leave behind. The ones who are failing are the ones who look at COVID as, okay, whew, that's over, back to doing what we were doing.
right,
Those are the ones that are not having a good time of it. The ones that have taken their experience in COVID and said, okay, we learned to do a whole bunch of new stuff
mm-hmm,
and to look at our constituencies differently. Now what? What works? What of that we learned can we use now moving forward? And what stuff needs to stay in the past?
right,
And I think that we as humans, if we do that same thing, is like, what am I leaving behind? That's the part of the definition of being successful at change is, okay, you're changing to do something new. You're building a new habit. What habits are you going to stop doing? Right? What are you going
right,
to, what are you, so to get this, I'm going to learn these new things, but I'm also going to stop doing
mm-hmm.
whatever that, whatever these things are. So yeah, that's, I think that focus of what am I leaving behind,
Okay.
if done intentionally is a
Right.
powerful
Well, that
tool.
leads me to my next question. You said something very interesting, and it's something I've been looking at a lot the last, definitely during COVID, and really looking at it a whole lot since moving back to the East Coast from the West Coast, which is what do I need to unlearn, right? Like
Hmm.
there's, we have patterns and things, pathologies and things that we pick up, right? And they
Sure.
serve a purpose to get us to a certain point. But my experience has been when you're trying, like you said, when you're trying to go from this point to the next point, there's some patterns you're going to have to let go of. You're going to have to replace them, right? And there's some ways of being going to have to
Yeah.
unlearn. So my question to you would be, in terms of when you're working with companies, or maybe even on a personal level, when you're working with companies, how can a company commit to unlearning some things, and whatever that means for
Sure.
you? I can explain more if you need to.
No, I mean, I think some of the things that some of the unearthing some of those sometimes they're called values, sometimes they're operating principles, or it's things that they make decisions on. But one of them was certainty, right? The idea that we have to be 100% certain before we do something. Well, that's less and less possible every day.
Mhm.
And so unlearning that, a lot of organizations are unlearning kind of arbitrary timelines where it's like, we're going to do this by this date.
Mhm.
And I know personally, one of the things I've done is I've really released myself from when something's going to happen, and just work the process until it does. Right. So focus less on results and more on process is
Mm.
something that I think is a valuable tool for organizations now, that helps them look at things differently and really examine more strategically what are the actions we're doing, what are the hypotheses uh, uh, that we have about getting to that goal. Because I think definitely before COVID and earlier in my career, any plan, any failure to hit a plan, the first um, question was who screwed up, who
Mhm.
didn't perform the way they were supposed to.
Mhm.
And I don't think that I think it's a natural question that it's got to be about somebody not executing. But I also have seen many more examples of people executing exactly the way they're supposed to do, and the plan was dumb, right? The strategy didn't work, and yet we had no mechanism to adjust that strategy. So for 3 years, we're digging a hole because that's what the plan said, instead of being able to have some sort of mechanism that says this isn't getting us to where we want to go. Well, too bad. We have a 3-year strategic plan, and we're just going to, continue to do. We can't bring everybody back together to rethink it, right? And so that's kind of been the change, is organizations using new tools to do their strategic planning. So the implementation and the planning are closer together. So you could say, well, does this work? Yes or no? Yeah, that's working. Keep going. No, that doesn't work. Stop that and start something else. Right. So the implementation and the planning inform each other as you move forward. Less kind of determinate. Right. So it's like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Well, again, we're looking out into a future that's uncertain, and step 3 doesn't exist. We thought it did 9 months ago, but it doesn't now. What do I do? Right? My plan just stalls. So I put it on the shelf and I ignore it and just keep doing what I was doing, instead of having a planning process that allows us to go, whoa, wait a minute, this doesn't exist. Now what are we going to do? Right? How are we going to move? That's called emergent strategy, right? So you don't really know, a process to plan and think strategically, but it's not necessarily about the big fat notebook that is the strategic plan, right? It's more about the process that you use to strategically think about how you're moving the organization forward.
Yeah, I'm asking that because I've seen all kinds of configurations, right? And I've done things where I now have a production company that I started in the beginning, closer to the beginning of the year. And one of the things I've had to learn, and this is just me and another person making films, right, and doing videos.
Right.
And I have a company, and it's called Burn the Manual Productions, and it's all about, there is no manual, right? We have, and kind of approaching things. How can I put it? The approach is, okay, I have some skills and there's some things I want to do. I know where I want to end up, but however the hell we get there is however the hell we get there.
Right.
And in each step of the way, it needs to be, okay, well, we're doing this. Is this moving us closer or farther away?
Exactly.
And it's not about pointing fingers, and it's not like you said, it's not about who screwed up. It's like, okay, if the goal was to, it's like, here's a good example. I was going to shoot a short here in Connecticut. We were going to shoot this short in December. And I was just driving myself crazy trying to get the co-director here from LA, the lead actress who's in Harlem, doing this person's over here, and how do you do it? And then I realized that, okay, I'm going about this completely the wrong way. Like there's no money involved in this. And I realized what I should have done was set a budget, raise the money, and then gone that route. Right. So I pulled the plug on everything. I called everybody and I said, this was a mistake that I made. I put the cart before the horse. This isn't working. Let's revisit this and get this done Q2 of 23. It gives me time to do it a smarter way. Right. And I know a lot of times what I've seen people do is they'll keep going. I've seen teachers do this a lot. They'll come in with a lesson plan and it doesn't matter. And you can see, and you taught, so you've done workshops. About 5 minutes into it, whether or not what you're doing is working, right? Whether it's going south and how quickly, or whether or not it's clicking. And a wise teacher, a wise individual will have four or five different things they can pull out when something isn't working. Yeah. We don't keep digging the hole just because we go, oh, I'm thinking, well, stop digging, And a lot of times I see people, and I've done it, but you put, you don't want to, there's this loss aversion, another buzzword, because you put so much time into something.
Sure.
So then you're absolutely determined that this is going to work because I've invested all this time. Instead of saying, like you said, going back, looking at what's the benchmark we're trying to hit and how far or how close are we to doing that?
Right.
And if it
Yeah.
means pulling everybody into the room again and saying, "Hey, look, everybody, we were the end goal, the objective hasn't changed, but how we're going
Right.
to do it has changed. I figured out a smarter way, or I figured out the way that we agreed on was a
Mhm.
disaster."
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Being, strategy agnostic, right?
Mhm.
Solution agnostic. I don't care, who came up with the idea. Does it work or does it not work? Right. And
Right.
being able to examine what what are those reasons that we're holding on to a solution, right? Or to a strategy. It's some of it's ego, some of it is sunk cost, right? Like I put all this time and effort into it, just like you said, it has to work. Um, but those are counterproductive to getting to the goal, right?
Mhm.
We should be able to drop something just, is it, you know, are your is are we get closer or further away? And if
Right.
the issue is we're further away, we're going to stop digging and move to something
Right.
else, right? And that fosters innovation and creativity because we're now okay. That first idea didn't work. Let's get deeper. What about it didn't work? How do we tweak it? Is there anything salvageable about it? That kind of thinking. But yeah, the whole idea of any path to move us toward that goal instead of, is there a right path? uh,
Right.
I don't know. I don't think those are not effective questions anymore. Is what's the right way? There's probably a dozen right
Mhm.
ways, right? And that's kind of the other thing that I would look at when you're saying if organizations can get rid of kind of either or,
Right.
like, you know and kind of embrace an idea of and embrace the idea that it's going to be this and that and this other thing and this other thing. There's not going to be, one way to get something done, right?
Right.
It can't be this or nothing,
Right.
or that kind of thing. It has to be, and it has to be, we're going to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of that, and together those things are all going to. So embracing kind of an and philosophy instead of this kind of either or thing, because I think either or cuts down our creativity. It cuts down the opportunities we have in front of us. It limits our thinking. It creates scarcity, right? Either
Mhm.
or, win, lose, instead of we can do this and that, right? And that's expansive. That's hopeful. That builds creativity, and innovation when you have an and kind of philosophy. There's a real power in that.
Okay, I'm going to wrap us up, but I want to respond to that. Then I have another question or two that I want you to give us how people can find you when they want to hire you and make you a millionaire
Sure.
if you're not a millionaire already. So, that made me think. One my big wish, um, if anything good can come out of COVID, which I believe it can, depending on who you are and how you want to manage it, right? How you
Sure.
self manage. My big wish, my big hope for nonprofits, companies, people on an individual basis is that we move away from this need for certainty. And then the big lesson is, okay, at any time, anything can happen.
Mhm.
And there's a curiosity and a flexibility in that, and like
Yeah.
living in this uncertainty. Like, okay, well, we know we want to do this, and either and being honest about the feedback that you're getting. This isn't working, or it is working,
Mhm.
or it is working, but if you did this, it would work even better, that type of thing. So
Right.
that's my wish, is that we
Yeah.
get that even with the COVID, we figure out it's okay not to know everything,
Yeah.
and to live in the uncertainty. And that's how you build and make something really incredible.
Yeah.
So
That's huge.
last question before I let you go. Last couple of questions. What would your last meal be?
My last meal.
Yeah.
Wow. My last meal would probably be something uh like cioppino, like a fisherman's stew kind of thing with
Okay.
big crusty bread.
Mm, okay.
That would be
Okay. Okay. How can folks reach you? What are your social media handles? How can they reach you?
Sure. Well, I'm Damon Colaluca on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn/Damon Colaluca, or Colaluca and Associates. That's our company. And I'm Damon Colaluca on Facebook as well. Instagram, Swifty Digits is the handle at Instagram, from my younger teenage gaming days. I just kept it. And then our website is www.colaluca.associates. No .com, just .associates, and you'll get right to us. And yeah, we're here to help change mindsets, give you tool sets, and then the skill sets to use those tools. So we're about building your capacity and helping you be better at managing change, and just like we
Okay.
talked about today.
I like it. We will leave on that note. So, if folks want to find me, this is for my audience. You can always find me. This Visionaries and Truth Tellers, it can be found on the Burn the Manual Productions website, the burnthemanualproductions.com, for this podcast, as well as the movies that I make. Anything that's visual is all on that particular website. Thank you all for listening. Thank you, Mr. Damon, for joining me. I will let you know when this goes live, and I will talk
Okay.
with you soon. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Bye-bye. See ya.
Bye-bye.